Hi guys, welcome to my channel, and I'm Felix the tutor. Welcome to my channel. Today we're talking about AUE, and we want to talk about Learning Unit 3. It's an interesting chapter, and there are things that you just have to understand there. Remember, I'm not going to upload the textbook or the study guide for you per se, because the study guide is the property of UNISA, and I'm not going to copy parts of it because it will simply get me in trouble with copyright. So please do go to Telegram and make sure that you download it from Telegram, because the one that I was using and making reference to was the 2021 copy. So you go to Telegram and make sure that you get the book from there and use that as you watch this video. Remember, this video is not a substitute for your study guide. Please, this is just a complement to your studies, so that I hope you understand certain things that might confuse you. And I'm also shooting this in a holiday season, so please do forgive me for background noise and sounds that you might be hearing, because the kids are actually on holiday. So thank you so much for that. So to kick it off, I'm not going to talk much about the diagrams that they have there, because this was the lecturer's attempt to make sure that you understand this context. So on my own side, I would just rather jump into it. Right, so the definition that they have for internal control, they went on to say Integrated Framework Executive Summary 2013. They said issued by the Committee of Sponsoring Organization, Tradeway Commission. I'll be referring to blah blah blah. It's a bunch of confusing terminologies. ISA 315, the revised version, went on to say identifying and assessing the risks of material misstatement through understanding the entity's environment, issued by the Federation of IC, what. Then you are also confused. The internal control process effected by the Board of Directors Management and reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of the objectives of operations. So these are all three very integral definitions, which are also very, very much confusing when you look at them at first glance on what exactly are they trying to say. So in a nutshell, internal control, these are measures which are put within an organization to limit risks. That's the definition of internal control in its simplest form. Internal control, these are measures which are put by an organization in order to limit risks. So risks can be financial, risks can be any adverse. What is it? Risk, you now have to understand. You also have to now get the definition of risks, because if I'm just going to be talking about limiting risks, I'm on the assumption that everyone understands what risks are. Risk simply means susceptibility to danger. Anything that enhances the probability of danger becomes a risk. For instance, if you're going to be driving without a seat belt, the risk is that you might be injured, or you might be more injured in terms of an accident. It doesn't necessarily mean that when you drive without a seatbelt, you are going to get into an accident. It's not definite, but it is the probability that if you are going to drive in those circumstances, there's a higher chance that you might be in danger. So the susceptibility to danger, that is exactly what is risk. So the duty of internal control seeks to limit risks. So the risks that are going to be limited, they are going to be financial risks and also other risks. For instance, if you get to campus, there's going to be certain gates that you need to access using your student card. So meaning certain people who don't have student cards cannot access that area. So UNISA went ahead and put in the thing that they put in there for you was a form of internal control, because they wanted to limit the risk of people who are not UNISA students entering certain parts of their campuses. So they went on to put in gates which are controlled by they went on to put gates which are controlled by access cards. Access cards being your student card. So what is an internal control? Internal control becomes that system which limits risks. For instance, if before a payroll is processed, it might be sent to checking. So that checking becomes an internal control. For instance, before you exit a supermarket, certain supermarkets still do it, where they ask to see the slip first and they are confirming the goods that you have. That is a form of internal control, which is trying to limit the risk of customers exiting with goods that they haven't paid for. So as you look around, auditing surrounds you. That's my understanding, that auditing is always in and around us, but it's just that you don't really understand why certain things are being done and why they're done that way. When you get to the garage, the petrol attendant comes to you and then is the one who's going to assist you put petrol or diesel for you. They're trying to limit the risk of someone just coming to the service station, then trying to drag they try to drag fuel from the fuel pumps and driving off without paying. That's why you see the petrol attendant there. The next time you come across a security guard is simply an internal control of an organization to make sure that they are controlling entry, they are controlling exit. So you just have to make sure that you look at it that way, that in a holistic manner. What is an internal control? This is a measure which has been put in place by management in order to limit risks. So these controls, these measures that they are going to be putting in order to limit risks, they are not always going to be 100%. That's where you get what they are now talking about is limitations of internal controls. Because these measures are not 100%, there are going to be certain weaknesses within those controls. So the first things that they have there, they have a diagram for you which talks about the inherent limitations of internal control. So when someone is talking about an inherent item is almost like I'm saying an inbuilt, like an item that is already going to come with internal control. No matter how perfect your internal control is going to be, there are always going to be inbuilt problems with internal control, or inbuilt things that make sure that, not make sure as such, but that limit the effectiveness of your internal control. The first thing that they have there is cost versus benefit. So management can ignore certain controls because they are too expensive to implement. For instance, if UNISA wanted to implement a fingerprint thumb access, imagine on all campus, it was going to take a bigger database to record all the thumb details of everyone rather than just giving them a card. So the thumb one was going to be more accurate because with a thumb access, you need the person with the student card. Someone can just give someone else their student card and they can access the premises. But with a thumb, you can't give a thumb. But for you to implement a thumb, it is a bit more expensive. That's what they mean, cost versus benefit. Then there's abuse of responsibility. Probably the director can come in with his friends and then go through the gate. Because it's a director, you're not going to ask the director of the company who else is in your car. You're just going to allow them in. So they are now abusing the responsibility there. The procedures may become inadequate. For instance, all the companies had all their procedures as internal controls. COVID hit. All of a sudden, now you needed to add more, which was masks. You needed to add more sanitizers, which means the controls that were there were inadequate because of COVID. There's also a potential of human error. Like when they're saying the potential of human error, they're saying because there's a person that is responsible for handling a certain situation, there is that possibility that the person might make a mistake. And because they make a mistake, it is also going to weaken your internal control. Then they say the controls might be directed at routine transaction rather than non-routine. Let's say you are used to saying, okay, if someone wants cash back, you deal with them, you give them the cash back that they need. And the cash back limitation might be 10,000 or maybe 5,000. What do you do when someone then wants a cash back of probably 100,000 or 50,000? You see, because it's a large sum and it's not routine, a transaction, you might not have sufficient controls in that regard. There's also a possibility of circumventing of controls where you see people being searched, body search. After a body search, you still have to go through a buzzer. And the buzzer is still going to tell you, okay, are you carrying something? Are you not carrying something? Meaning, the buzzer and the body search, they are serving the same purpose. So those circumvention of controls, these are just controls which are addressing the same issue. They're just different controls, but they are addressing the same issue. For instance, you have to sign by the gate, you have to sign by the receptionist, you have to sign again by your manager. meaning you're assigning 3 times, but it's just you just repeating the same control, and it's being done 3 times. So you just have to understand that there's going to be limitations which are going to be there in terms of your internal control. So as you study this topic, please make sure that you just understand what is an internal control. Okay, an internal control is a measure which is put in place by management and those charged with governance to limit risks. You want to limit risks. What are your risks? What do we mean by risk in an auditing sense? Risk simply means susceptibility to danger, meaning we want to limit risks of probably fraud in the financial statements. We want to limit risks of maybe loss of inventory, and we want to limit risks of a lot of things, right? There's a lot of things that we would want to limit it. But then we go on to the components, right? There are also certain components, though they don't really get into depth with them here. The 5 components of internal control becomes your control environment. Then there's your risk assessment. Then there's your control activity. There's your information and communication. Then after that, you then have to monitor that control that you would have put in place. So they do have they do have links to the books that they want you to study. Just go and study that so that you can get a clear understanding of what do they refer to as the components, the 5 components of control, internal control. So they're going to come and they might ask you maybe to list them. They might ask you to list them at most. Just know what they are, and if you can also go for further study, please study that COS 2013 page 4 and 5, and just make sure that you just know what is the components, what is found in internal control. The control environment is just the environment where you're going to find that control. Number 1, risk assessment, it's self-explanatory. Control activity, what is the core which controls what's being done, the information, how is the information being communicated back to management. Monitoring, can we really monitor that if something that we have implemented is indeed effective or is indeed useful? You have self-assessments there.